Today is Tuesday, January 3rd, 2017, and this is the beginning of my interview with
Captain Mark Paul Larson
at the
Summer Glen
Golf Community.
in Ocala, Florida.
My name is Sam Kwiatkowski, and I'll be the interviewer. Could you please tell us your full name and address?
Mark Paul Larson, Ocala, Florida, 34473.
Where were you born?
I was born at the Great Lakes Naval Hospital in 1948,
How old are you today?
68.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My father was retired Navy Captain Gilbert H. Larson. He was in the Navy for 22 years. He was a dentist in the Navy and served on the Yorktown during World War II. What was the other question?
What were their occupations? Who were your parents?
Okay, my dad was a Navy dentist for 22 years, then he retired in 1964 and moved to Brookfield, Wisconsin. That's why we're still Packer fans. And he practiced 19 more years and put 4 kids through college. So, my mother is Mildred M. Larson Flatley. She remarried after my dad died in 1992 to my best friend from dental school's father. And she lived with him 10 more years, and she recently passed away in July. So both of my parents have passed away.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes, I have an older brother, also a dentist, Dr. Gilbert H. Larson III. I had a younger brother and sister, twins, Carrie James Larson, who was in sales for a French company called BioMérieux, and his twin sister Carol Jean Larson, who later married, her married name was Casaurus. She still lives in Waukesha, Wisconsin. She was 30 years as an English college prep high school teacher.
What were you doing before you entered the service?
I went to college at the University of Wisconsin in La Crosse for 4 years, and I was accepted then to Marquette University School of Dentistry on a Navy dental scholarship, but that was until my second year. So I did 4 years there and signed up for the Navy in an early commissioning program. And when I graduated, I was commissioned as a lieutenant and was sent to my first duty station, which was Pensacola, Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Florida.
Why did you choose this specific branch of service?
Well, I had a lot of history, family history, as I told you earlier, that wasn't recorded. My grandfather was a medical officer on board the Utah at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. He retired as a commander after the war, survived. My father served 2 years on the Yorktown as a naval officer. He retired as a Navy captain in 1964. My older brother was in the Navy for 10 years and then got out, and he ran, as he's a dentist also. He ran he was the chief of the VA dental service in Honolulu for 35 years, and he retired about 4 years ago. So I definitely wasn't going to join the Army.
Can you describe your basic training?
Well, that's interesting. When I was accepted to the scholarship in dental school, I was assigned to the ROTC program. I'm familiar with ROTC, ROTC program at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I checked in when I got to school, my first week of school, and he said, well, we have meetings every Tuesday at whatever time. And I said, well, every Tuesday from 11 until 4, I'm in the clinic. We're in the clinic working, so I can't come to the meetings. He said, well, check in with us once in a while. Well, I didn't really have any. I went back a couple times just to say hi and to check out on leave, and I never really had any indoctrination. I was the son of a Navy. I was a Navy brat, so I guess I knew a little bit about the Navy. So. There was no boot camp.
Did you receive any special training?
Yes. I specialized and became in the field of dentistry and became a prosthodontist. A prosthodontist specializes in implants, full mouth rehabilitations, dentures, partial dentures, crowns and bridges, that sort of thing. I did a one-year fellowship at the Naval Academy where I was stationed, and then I did a 3-year residency at the Bethesda Naval Hospital, and other special training. I mean, I had some warfare training. I was and mass casualty training because I was on 3 ships, and you know, you had to be trained. You were part of the mass casualty team. So other than that, and dentistry is kind of a lifelong training exercise because there's always something new coming out, and you got to keep learning. So.
How did you adapt to military life?
Oh, easily. I grew up my whole life. As I told you, I was born at the Naval Hospital, Great Lakes, Illinois, and my whole life was in the Navy, with moving around with my family, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the travel, and I think being in a lot of different places prepared me for a lot of new experiences. I enjoyed it a lot. I was fortunate that I was able to make the rank of captain, and I was an XO, executive officer of a dental center, and actually 2 dental centers, and then got to be a CO at my first duty station was Pensacola, and it was a pretty big job. We had 22 clinics in 5 states, from Panama City, Florida, all the way into Texas, and it was a great job for me. So.
Were you married or single?
When I went into the Navy, I was my wife, who was still my wife, Sandy, and I were married after my sophomore year of dental school. So I was a Lieutenant JG, you know, in training while I was in dental school, and we got married after my sophomore year. So she's been with me ever since.
What do you recall about physical regiment on the ships?
The physical regiment, I mean, the training that we would be required to do was pretty demanding. You know, the Navy, as all the armed forces, came up with the physical readiness program where you had to maintain body weight depending on your height. You had to be able to run 3 miles in a certain amount of time depending on your age. So many sit-ups, so many push-ups, that sort of thing. But that's one thing the service is really good at. Everybody's involved in a physical readiness regime, taking care of themselves. You know, as we used to say in the Navy, Dental Corps, fit to bite, fit to fight. So I was stationed with the Marines on 3 occasions, and I didn't deploy to Iraq, but many of my friends did. And where the Marines go, wherever the Marines go, they have Navy medical and dental and everything else. So we go with them. But lost a couple friends that way.
What do you remember about the food and the social life?
Well, the food for me in the Navy was, well, most of my time was not spent at sea. It was spent at home, so I got great food from my wife. But the food on Navy ships is outstanding. As an officer, you're treated pretty well. Back in the early days, they had stewards that would serve you, and then later on, that all went away. And I mean, they still had people that would cook the food and serve you, but we had great food, particularly on the ships. And I was one of the ships I was on was the USS Puget Sound, which was home ported in Gaeta, Italy. It was the 6th Fleet flagship. So the 3-star admiral was on board with his staff, and in his responsibility, he had a NATO hat and commander of the 6th Fleet. So every ship in the Mediterranean, that's a pretty arduous area because of all the Mideast and all that. We spent a lot of time in Israel because the Marines, our United States Marines, held the airport there, in the early 80s. And in fact, one of the first terrorist incidents against America was the BLT building in Beirut, Lebanon, which was a housing area for the Marines and those that supported them, was bombed by a truck bomber. And the reason it happened was because our government didn't have any rules of engagement. The Marines that were guarding the gates didn't have bullets in their weapons. And everything after that changed. So.
Did you serve during a war?
Well, I served during the Iraq War, the first Iraq War, and then and many years thereafter. As a matter of fact, I mentioned earlier I was a CO in Pensacola, but I only could stay in that job for 3 years. And so it came time for me to move, and moved me to Camp Lejeune, because I only had 1 year to go before mandatory retirement at 30. And so I had to go to what they called an operational tour, and that was with the Marines. And I got there in July of 2001, and then everybody knows that on September 11th, the trade towers came down, and everything then after that changed again. And I was retained on active duty. I could have said no, but I was retained on active duty for 9 more years. So I ended up serving 39 years in the Navy. So.
Were you part of any specific operations?
Not as a warfighter, but as supporting efforts. When I was on the USS Lexington. We were involved in. It was a training carrier for Navy and Marine Corps pilots, but there were several rescue missions that we accomplished in the Cuban refugees and things like that. I had to be trained and had to go through the Dilbert Dunker and helos because I was sent on helos to other ships to treat patients that didn't have a dentist on board. So I had to do a lot of the preparatory thing. We had to, and with the Marines, you had to qualify every year with the M16 and the 9mm handgun. So those are the kinds of things that I got to do, but was proud to be with the Marines.
What are some memories of going overseas?
Oh, it was a wonderful experience. My family got to be with me when we were in Gaeta, Italy, for example. There was a little DOD school for our 2 children, and they were younger, like 5th and 6th grade, but a great opportunity for travel. They allowed us, a lot of times the wives that lived in Gaeta would follow the ship where it was going to be, and they would come and stay and bring the kids. They were encouraged in the school for the kids to go that way. They'd have to write a report on where they went, but they both learned a lot about the world. We spent a lot of time in Israel because that's when the Beirut thing was going on, and we were in Haifa, Israel, which is 70 miles south of Beirut, and met some friends there. Still have friends there. It was a neat experience, a great opportunity for travel, and great opportunity for the kids as well.
Now, when your family wasn't with you, how did you stay in contact with them?
Well, back when I was in, I retired, about 2009. But in the early days, there was only, if you're on a ship, there was only one way. There was no email. There was no texting. You wrote a letter. And many times, for example, we'd be out for just 3 or 4 weeks, and I'd write a letter or 2, and they wouldn't even get back to my wife before I got back. So nowadays, they all have email, they Skype, they do all kinds of things. It's a lot easier for people to stay in touch. Doesn't mean it's any easier on the families at home, but it certainly helps. But mostly it was letters, and no cell phones. Didn't have cell phones then, but pretty much that was it.
What did you do for recreation when you were off duty?
Well, different things. Sights, did a lot of sightseeing with buddies of mine on the ship. We had, Friday, and we worked regular work days. Sometimes when we were in a foreign port, we saw patients. For example, our ship was also a repair ship, a destroyer tender, so it fixed the other ships, and so we'd work from 7 till 6 or 8 o'clock at night during the week. But the weekends, we generally could get some time off if you didn't have the watch or something like that. Actually, I set up a program when we were overseas. We'd be in France or Spain or the Costa del Sol of Spain or whatever. So I set up golf tournaments for sailors on the ship, and we'd go up and have a little tournament, and I got to play a lot of golf, so that was pretty cool. But a lot of sightseeing, places I'd never seen, so. But there wasn't that much recreation time, it was more work.
Did you get enough sleep?
Usually when I was at sea, I did. Yeah. In fact, the best place in the world to sleep is on a Navy ship at sea. It's very calming, unless you're in a big storm, of course, but the racks are all aligned, so it sort of rocks you to sleep. Even in heavy seas, it's kind of nice. And a lot of times at sea and ships, we had 2 hours for lunch, which was great, and so sometimes we even got to take a nap. So.
Where were you when the war ended?
Which war?
Iraq.
I was still in Camp Lejeune with the Marines, and it was a big celebration. Everybody was happy about it, but a lot has happened since, and the war really hasn't ended. In fact, it's intensified. But you can say all you want about whether we should have been there or whether we shouldn't. I'm not going to make any comment on that, but we were there, and I think we served a purpose. But it was a tough time for our troops, for our airmen, our sailors, the Marines, even the Coast Guard guys. It was a tough time.
What kind of friendships did you form while serving?
Oh, boy. Lots. People I still communicate with, 40 years later. I'll run into people even at a different meeting here or there, and lifelong friendships. Special bond.
Did you admire the people you served with?
For the most part, yes. Every once in a while you'd run into a knucklehead, but I had a lot of admiration for people who were in the service, who gave what they gave every day, and I think it really developed some character in me as well.
How long were you overseas?
Well, just 4 years. 4 years in Italy. And that was while I was on the flagship, so.
Did you ever witness any action or combat?
No. I traded casualties, but I never witnessed any action.
How did you feel like in seeing that?
Well, I feel like I was pretty well trained to do what I did, and obviously I was not a physician, I was a dentist, but still had a lot of anatomy experience and triage training, and so I believe I served my part. But in the medical, the corpsmen, the guys that go with the Marines, or whether it be in the Navy corpsmen go with the Marines, in the Army's got corpsmen and corps women who go with them, and they have saved lots of lives, but they see a lot of tough stuff. I treated a lot of wounded warriors at Camp Lejeune. I told you I was a prosthodontist. I did implants. I probably had 40 or 50 injured Marines, many of them badly injured. But it was always fun for them to get their teeth back with a full mouth rehab, or 7 or 8 or 9 implants replacing their smile, and so that was a special thing. Besides the military, besides the warriors, there's a lot of other people in the military that serve, and they're needed in many different areas. Our ship, for example, had 7 chaplains on board, and it had 7 chaplains because many of the ships in the Mediterranean weren't big enough to have a chaplain on. Not every ship could have a chaplain, so they'd fly around in helicopters and go to a ship and spend a week or so or whatever. And we had 2 priests, 2 rabbis, and like 5 other chaplains. And one of the chaplains, one of the rabbis, his name was Arnie Resnikov. He was in the BLT building when it blew up, when it got blown up. He survived, but he wrote an account when Ronald Reagan was president, what happened that day, and President Reagan read it before a joint session of Congress while he was there, and it was pretty memorable.
It is. Did you admire your commanding officers?
I did, for the most part. I had a couple issues with a couple of them, or 1 or 2 of them, but I learned what I shouldn't do when I was able to be a commanding officer, and mostly that was to listen to other people. And if somebody came to you with an idea, they wanted to change something, I'd ask them to write a point paper about how they'd like to see it change. And many times there were people that came up with great ideas that all the experts didn't think of. So,
what were some of your most memorable experiences?
Wow. Well, I have a lot, but one of the things I got to do when I was in Pensacola, every day, every Tuesday, the Blue Angels practice. And so I had a balcony off my office, and I'd go out in the balcony with a cup of coffee and watch the Blue Angels fly right overhead. I had a cat shot off a carrier out of a jet, not a Blue Angel, but a regular A4 with 2 seats, and I flew on and off the ship a lot on what they called the COD, the Carrier Onboard Delivery Aircraft, which was a propeller plane, but still quite exciting to take off and land. I don't know if I really answered your question, but I have so many experiences. I could probably talk a long time about most of them, but most of them were good, and I felt very fortunate to have served, and particularly have served 39 years. So.
How were you received by your family when you came home?
Oh, they were happy to see me. I was happy to see them. But to be honest, sometimes I got in the way of the regular routine because I didn't know the routine or whatever. And so my wife would set me straight, tell me what I could do, what I couldn't do. As a father, you're typically in charge of discipline. But with my wife being there with the kids a lot more than I had been, she pretty much was. So, but it was always a big welcoming home when I would come home. So, but many of my deployments were short. I didn't go away for 2 years, or I did go away for 2 years one time, but I had to go on a company tour in Puerto Rico so I could keep my son in high school where he was. But I was able to get home in between a lot. But the ships I was on, I was able to go out for 3 or 4 weeks and then come back. And so the constant, it wasn't gone that long. It wasn't like I was gone for 2 years. except for one tour. So
How did you adjust to civilian life coming back?
well, that was easy for me. I while I was while I was working with the Marines at Cherry Point, Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point, doing dentistry. And when I retired, they asked me if I wanted to stay on and do a contract. And so I applied for a contract. So I got to do the same thing I was doing in the same office with the same people for 2 years. And making a little bit more money than I was before, so that was pretty cool. So I tried private practice in North Carolina. I had to get my license in North Carolina first, which I did, and then I just did that for about a year, and then decided it was time to retire completely, so I did.
So what have you done since leaving the military? Just the private practice?
Yes, that. I've been active in the American Dental Association and dental meetings, and have been involved in some training programs that I put on about prosthodontics. But mostly since I left the military, I retired, and so we found this place to live, and I play golf only about 5 days a week. And my wife plays a lot too, and we love the weather here in Florida. I lived in Pensacola and I lived in Orlando. I was stationed. There was a big Navy base in Orlando. I was stationed there for a while. It was the only. There was a recruit training center and an NTC, a naval training center, where they trained the nuclear students and that whole base closed many years ago. But
Who were your best friends?
well, I had many, and still have many. One of my best friends is also a retired Navy captain. I said earlier before we were recording that my my dad died in 1995, and my best friend in dental school, who also later went in the Navy, he called me around Thanksgiving time and told me that his mother had passed away. And little did I know that 2 weeks later I'd be calling him telling my dad passed away. And one of us said, I say it's him, he says it was me, one of us said, wouldn't it be something if our parents got together? Well, 2 years later they got married. So, and he was a dentist also, the father of my best friend. My best friend was a dentist, and he's still practicing. In fact, he's the president of the Greater Orlando Dental Society in in Orlando, and still practicing. So he was probably my best friend.
Did you have any siblings that served in the military?
My older brother was in the Navy for 10 years. He got out at the 10-year mark, and that's when he started working for the VA in Honolulu, and later served as chief there for 35 years. But my younger brother and sister, neither of them joined the service. Neither of my kids did either. I tried to get both of them to go to the Naval Academy, but neither one of them wanted to do that. And neither of my children went into dentistry either, so I probably pushed too hard for that. So there's lots of different things.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war?
Oh yes, I believe it has. I believe we need to. I believe we need to present a strong. We need to have a strong military to prevent people doing things to us. Although I think that I won't make any political statements, but I think we've lost that ability lately, and I'm looking forward to it getting back, because peace comes from strength. And this is a crazy world, and we see what's happening all around the world today. And without the deterrent, we'd be in trouble, I think, my personal opinion. But I think our military is very important. And it's a good career. The military can be a good career. You don't have to be a warfighter. You can be in the military and be almost anything. But it's a good retirement. Everybody needs to think about retirement. When you start a job, you need to think about what kind of options you're going to have when you retire. The Navy, all the armed services has developed ways to save money and invest money and besides your retirement. So it's a good profession and a very, very important one. Our Veterans Club here, I was president of our Veterans Club here. Did you interview Don Shears? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you know Don, he's an incredible man. I was president for 4 years, but he's been like the chaplain for the Veterans Club for forever, and he's an incredible speaker, an interesting man. But our Veterans Club, we had 7 World War II vets that were here. And every one of them, we raised the money for them to go on the honor flights. And many of our people have served as guardians on the honor flight. I'm on the list to do it. I haven't been asked to do it yet, but I'd still like to do it. It's one of my benchmarks I'd like to achieve, as long as they're doing it. What was the question again? I probably didn't answer. I'm kind of losing track of the questions, and I just ramble, as my wife says.
That was.
That's okay.
How did your wartime experiences affect your life?
It made me not want to go to war, but if I had to, I would. I've had a lot of friends that didn't come back, but just as many or more who have died from natural causes, and it's hard to you never know. If we all knew when we were going to die, then we'd know when to start Social Security. I tell that to most people anyway. Start it when you can. But I'm grateful for the service. I'm grateful for the training that I had. I'm grateful for the character building side of the service. I think most people in the service really develop a character. And character, my definition of character, is what you do in the dark. And not too different than Boy Scouts and organizations like that, Girl Scouts. So Eagle Scout would be kind of like Admiral, You'd be given a major achievement.
Yeah. Do you have post-traumatic stress, or do you know anybody who does?
I know people that do. I don't.
What effect did serving in the military have on your faith or spirituality?
Oh, it made it stronger. All services have chaplains and of all different denominations and churches, and doesn't matter where you are. We had chaplains on board ships. It's a part of every ceremony. It'd start out with a prayer. Things have changed a little bit. Sometimes they're not, allowing that now, which I think is wrong. But it increased my spirituality and my giving to the church.
Have you remained in contact or reunited with any fellow veterans?
Oh yes, I see them often. We have one of them is a good friend in Atlanta. We go hiking 2 times a year in the mountains of North Carolina. But every Christmas we still send cards to good friends all around the country. It's always good to hear from them. And when you're in the military, there's almost no place you can go where you don't have somebody that you know. You could stop and stay with them rather than a motel. And so every once in a while we'll get a car. We found out how many friends we had when we lived in Orlando because of Walt Disney World. Oh, we're coming down to Disney. Okay, sure. Stay with us. So.
Are you a member of any veterans organizations?
Well, the Summer Glen Veterans Club here. I'm a life member of the MOA. It's called MOA, military. I don't even know what it stands for anymore. Military Officers Association, and they have all kinds of helpful things that they can offer you, and plus. When dealing with legislation in Congress, they can break down what legislation is, good for the military, what legislation might not be so good. So that'd be the only one really I'm active in. I'm a member of USAA, but it's mostly for insurance because it's a good deal. One of the things about USAA, if you knew anybody who was in the service, is it's incredible insurance and investment opportunities.
What are some life lessons you've learned in the military?
Perseverance. Don't quit when you don't think you can get there easily. I mean, don't always take the easy road. You got to work hard to succeed in life. You can't give up. You have to trust other people. Learn how to listen to other people, and I think the spiritual side of my Navy experience was very helpful in my life in many ways.
What lessons would you like to pass on to today's generation?
I think there's some misconceptions about our military from people who are not familiar with it. I think that people need to understand that our country needs a military, and the people that go into the military, as a general rule, are sharp people. And even if they're not, many of them are when they get out because of what they've learned. So our military organizations, doesn't matter what service, are important. They need to be supported. The families of the military need to be supported. They need to make their lives a little easier for some of the things they go through. And I think much of that does happen. Maybe more needs to.
Is there anything I forgot to ask you about your military experience?
Well, probably not. You're very thorough, Sam. Would I do it again? Yes. Would I go tomorrow if they needed me? Yes. I'd have to lose a little weight, though. I'm glad I did it. I think it really developed some things in my life for me, my beliefs, and taught me how to deal with both difficult things and how to deal with those who didn't deal with their lives effectively. But yes, it's there are many branches of the many jobs in the military besides warfighter. The military needs all kinds of other people to take care of the warfighters, but that's our goal, to take care of them the best we can.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.